Okay, let's open a word of prayer. Lord, thank you for this day. We pray to bless our time together, and as we try to make some sense of the things that are going on in the world, bless our time together today. In Jesus' name, amen. Well, today I'm going to use a title. I tried to do a midweek update this week, and it sort of worked. I was going to title it "I Am AI," and now I see my. Can I get my slides up here? So hang on a second here as we try to get my plugged in here.
That's what you're sending us, is what's on the screen.
Okay. How about that? Okay. Operator error there. It couldn't have been me on Thursday night when everything was just going completely berserk. I know it just couldn't have been me. So I Am AI. We're going to talk some about AI today because that was a big deal. And again, this is our disclaimer that I use each week now, that generative AI was not used in the research or preparation of this update. It's very tempting to do a ChatGPT or even GPT-4, assuming you can get onto the system and just ask it to do things. And I get a lot of things from people that have, they've been using ChatGPT to talk about end times prophecy and things like that. But some of them come back to me with, it almost seems that the thing is demonic in respects. And so that may be that it has a bit of magic. So I'm going to play you, I have a lot of things on AI today. I'm going to try to focus on that and a little bit on judicial reform in Israel with a couple other things thrown in. I will start off. So again, we talk about the convergence of events and this grid that I use: acceleration, convergence, logistics, and understanding. And everywhere I look now, I'm hearing people saying things are accelerating, things are converging. These are on secular newscasts. Everybody seems to realize or recognize that something is going on. Particularly the people that seem to be creating a lot of the chaos, they know something's going on because they're making it happen. But again, this quote, old quote attributed to Lenin: there are decades where nothing happens, there are weeks where decades happen, and now I could say there are days when years happen. That is happening very, very quickly. And when we get into AI, we'll talk about that. And we know that as we get closer to the end, there's this passage in Daniel I reference all the time, that people will understand more about how these end time prophecies are actually going to play out as we get closer. I think we're still in the realm of reasonable speculation. So it's interesting. I have friends who they have this particular view and that particular view, and this is where the final beast empire comes from. It's over here, and this is where the beast comes from. And so we'll figure it out as we get into this period of time more closely. But I think this week with some of the things that were going on with AI were very difficult. So I'm going to make a recommendation. I'm going to do a radio interview with Andy White on Open Up the Doors podcast. He's out on Long Island in New York. I've done his show previously. That'll be on Thursday, April 6th, I think at 10 a.m. I might have the time wrong. I'll post it on my Facebook page, and just look for Open Up the Doors. And he's also on Facebook. And then a week from Monday, I'm going to do Stand for the Truth with David Fiorazo. I also have the conference in Canada, May 5th and 6th in Calgary, ldbc.ca, Last Days Bible Conference, ldbc.ca. And I have 4 talks for that. I'm going to talk about Jerusalem, and I've been working on some graphics of the Temple Mount that I have. There's a great website that I found that has these 3-dimensional, well, there's a number of them. There's a website called 3D Warehouse. There's another one called Sketchfab. And Sketchfab, for example, for the way the Temple Mount is oriented, there's different ideas as to where the temple was. And by the way, I do not accept the City of David view. If the temple had been in the City of David, it would have had to be on a platform that was like 200 feet high, and there's absolutely zero evidence that there was a temple platform down there that high. Now everybody said, well, the Romans destroyed it, but you don't cart off tons and tons of debris like that. You let it lay around. That's why they have these archaeological sites that have layer upon layer upon layer, including the City of David. And when I was in the City of David, I asked some of the archaeologists, what do you think of this view that the temple was actually located down here in the City of David? And they were like, the one guy said, I've never heard such nonsense. So I just don't think it's a valid view. You're free to follow that view if you want. And I'm not building the thing anyway, and neither are you. So I would go, so there are different views. There's the view that it was over the Dome of the Rock and the stone that's under there. Then there's another view. Let me get my little laser pointer here, which is not big enough to see, but you can kind of see it there on the right. There's a thing called the Dome of the Tablets, and there's a stone under there. It's north of the Temple Mount. This is looking to the west, an aerial view, and there's a Dome of the Tablets here, and the reason some people think that is because it's in line with this eastern gate, and that the belief is, among some traditions that they look at, is that this eastern gate lined up with the, like straight into the temple. And they think, so that would have been where the Holy of Holies was located, was over that. And then there's another view, there's a fountain here between, this is the Al-Aqsa Mosque. And by the way, there was a Palestinian shot today, or yesterday. They're in the month of Ramadan. And it's always interesting when they say it's the holy month of Ramadan, so we have to prepare for violence. It's sort of like, I mean, do we say that we're having Passover and, Christian celebration of Passover and the Lord's resurrection, and we have to prepare for violence? It's kind of a crazy situation. But in between the Al-Aqsa Mosque and the Dome of the Rock, right in this area, there's a fountain called the Al-Qas Fountain. It's interesting that if you go to a archaeological site in Lebanon, and there's these great graphics at Sketchfab that show the 3D renderings of the ruins at Baalbek, up in the area of the Bekaa Valley in Lebanon. It was built by the Romans, and it's interesting, if you take that layout, like a schematic of that layout, and put it on the Temple Mount, there's an octagon a six-sided building. Now that's an eight-sided building, but there's some evidence that what was there before was six-sided. There's a six-sided building there, and there's also a temple right where the Al-Aqsa Mosque is. It fits perfectly, but right where the Al-Qas Fountain is at Baalbek, it was a statue of the Roman Emperor Hadrian. And so some people think, well, they put the Roman statue over the holiest place of the civilization that was there before, the Jewish civilization. So it's very interesting, and you'll see when I get the graphics all done. So I actually see there's a line. That's where some people think it's at the north, some people think it's in the middle, at the Dome of the Rock, and other people think it's towards the south. So those are the main views. But we know that, eventually we've got this Jerusalem as a cup of trembling for all people. It talks about that in Zechariah, and we see that is starting to come about. It's probably one of the most tension-riddled areas on planet Earth. It's always interesting if Jewish people go up there just to walk around the perimeter of the Temple Mount. You see all these stories in Arab papers. Jews storm Temple Mount. It's these students and women and that type of thing walking around with no weapons or anything like that. It's an insane claim. So let me talk about this and get it out of the way. So President Trump, former President Trump, was indicted this week by a Manhattan grand jury. The indictment has not yet been released. It's sealed. I believe the judges said that it can be unsealed. Usually what happens, and I did some white-collar criminal law in my legal days, an indictment will be sealed. It's filed with the court because they need to get arrest warrants and that type of thing, but it's filed under seal so that nobody can see it. And they want to do that because they want to go arrest the person because they're afraid they might flee if they find out they're going to be arrested. So they will seal the indictment. So in the last days of the Trump administration, there was this theory that the Justice Department had filed a bunch of sealed indictments with the courts all over the country. And they made up this search of the PACER filing system. They came up with these numbers. And I remember, I think I did a show with Doug Hagman when the number was like 3,000 or 5,000 sealed indictments. Knowing how these indictments come about, sometimes it takes years to get these indictments. And to get 5,000 sealed indictments in a short period of time, it's just, the justice system is, in the US, even though there's thousands, about 8,500 lawyers, there's just not enough to do all that work because you have to have all these grand juries working at the same time. And there's just no way to keep that quiet, but there was this theory that President Trump was going to take down the deep state, everybody was going to get arrested, and everybody was going to be sent to Gitmo. And I said, I thought the whole notion was nonsense. And I said that when the number was 5,000. Now, I don't know, last time I checked, the number was 300,000, probably over 1 million now, sealed indictments. It's just, folks, it's just not possible. And it's fantasy land. It's just not going to happen, particularly with the Justice Department that we have. They're not going to do anything to take down the people that are in power. So Trump was indicted. The report is that the indictment includes 34 counts. Now, nobody knows exactly the specifics, but we know from people who testified at the grand jury that have spoken out that it seems to relate to a hush money payment to this porn star named Stormy Daniels, who she has denied having had an affair with Trump. And they say, well, Trump mischaracterized it because it was characterized as a legal fee when it really wasn't a legal fee. It was hush money, which, by the way, is the same thing that the Hillary Clinton campaign did, where they paid legal fees to the firm who hired whatever the organization was to gin up these Russian conspiracy claims against President Trump. But that was okay, and she's never going to be prosecuted for that. So, and they're going to get, apparently, I don't know, there might be 34 entries of this in a business ledger someplace that it was, a legal expense, and so they're going to say each one of those is a count. Now, it relates to the problem, though, is that the business misrepresentation law, misrepresenting an entry, is a misdemeanor. Misdemeanors in New York have to be filed within 2 years of when the entry was made. Well, these entries were made back in 2016 or 2016. And by my math, that's about 7 years ago, so they have a problem. So they have to make it into a felony. And they're saying, well, it's a federal election law violation he's trying to hide, therefore it gets turned into a felony with a longer statute of limitations. But the problem there is that a state prosecutor has no ability to file a federal election law claim. It just doesn't exist. So Alan Dershowitz, who's no fan of President Trump, he said this week, I heard him say, I would never vote for the guy. But he says, this is his opinion in Newsweek, appeared Friday. And he said, this is a very, very weak case. In fact, I think I heard him interviewed on Bannon's War Room yesterday, and he said a first-year law student should be able to get these charges dismissed. That's assuming that the judge is a fair judge. But the problem is it's in Manhattan, and there's a lot of bad blood between Trump and the judges there. And the judge that's been assigned to just tried one of Trump's businesses and found his accountant or chief financial officer guilty. So this is a couple comments from Dershowitz. Because the case is to be presented to a Manhattan petit jury and judge, unless there is a change of venue, it is certainly possible that Trump could be convicted against the weight of the evidence and the law. It is also possible that a conviction could be affirmed on appeal by the New York courts. And by the way, the New York State Trial Court is known as the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court in New York is not the highest court in the state of New York. The trial court is called the Supreme Court. It is also possible a conviction could be affirmed on appeal by the New York courts. It would likely not survive a U.S. Supreme Court review, but that will not occur for years, if at all. No one, of course, knows the impact that this will have on the election. And that shouldn't matter. What matters greatly is that DA Alvin Bragg, a Democrat, funded by, although the person who we claim is, people have said for years have been funding him. Oh, I know. I don't even know who the guy is. And I don't believe that for a second, but has weaponized the justice system to target a political opponent based on a non-existent or at best an extremely weak claim. When the indictment is unsealed, probably early next week, we'll know the extent of the damage to the rule of law. It is not possible that the evidence and law will surprise us all. It is not impossible that the evidence and law will surprise us all and present a slam dunk case, but based on everything we know about the long history of this investigation, don't count on it. And Dershowitz is a smart guy, and I just think that this is a weaponization of the justice system. I have a lot of friends in Israel. I was on the phone with people in Israel a lot this week as things were melting down there, and I'll talk about that in a little bit. But understand that the same thing that's being done to Trump here has been done to Netanyahu. He has these indictments against him. And so my point is, look, if that's a valid case, go forward with your case and convict him. By the way, there's nothing in U.S. law or Israel law that says if you're indicted, you can't run for election or serve. It doesn't exist. But in Israel, they're trying to make it that way, even though that's not the case. And I'm not even sure that the Israeli law says that if you're convicted of a crime, you can't run for office. They took out one of the ultra-Orthodox ministers that are in Netanyahu's coalition, and they said, well, he signed an agreement that said he wouldn't serve as a minister in the government. But I saw a translation of that. I don't think that's what it said. So amazingly, I know this is surprising to you, sometimes the judges make it up. And I ask people in Israel, how long is these cases against Netanyahu going to take? 5 years. 5 years? He's in his 70s. If they had a valid case, they would go all the way to judgment on it. That's my opinion. You don't wait around forever, drag it out like this. And so there is a weaponization of the legal system, I think, in an improper fashion to try to undermine him. And it's a mess. So now this is another case. I think this is one of the biggest attacks on the First Amendment in the history of the United States. And it's been done by the Federal Justice Department. There was a guy back in the 2016 election, and people make up funny memes on Twitter and Facebook. You may have noticed this. So what he did was he said, hey, all you Hillary Clinton voters, be sure to text to vote so your vote counts. Well, there's no text to vote. So what the Justice Department did was they got some old Ku Klux Klan era law that said you can't interfere in an election and charged this guy named Mackey with interference in the 2016 election. And he was convicted this week in a court. I think it was in New York City someplace. He could now face, for putting that on Twitter, 10 years in federal prison. And I'm telling you, as your time that you're going to be in prison goes up, your conditions of imprisonment get worse. Like you get over 10 years, I don't think you can go to a farm until you get down to a certain amount of time before your release. A low minimum security prison. This is an outright attack on the First Amendment. It's a weaponization of the legal system against people that disagree with the regime that's in power. This is what they used to do in the old Soviet Union, in East Germany, the Stazis. It's the exact same thing. The thing that sort of troubles me is I have friends that support parties that I don't support and issues that I don't support. But the people in power, the thing that really concerns me is that there is no restraint on them to just not go out and completely destroy people's lives. We see it with some of the protesters after the last election, one of whom now's been in jail waiting trial without bail for over 800 days. This is egregious. This is stuff that we thought only happened in third world dictatorships. And yet the cry is, Trump's a dictator. But did this happen under Trump? No. And they say Netanyahu's a dictator, which is just, I'm going to play you a clip of a former Israeli prime minister saying that this week. This is nonsense, people. Make good arguments. Be reasonable. You can have an opposing view. I get that. But I don't know how to say this in a nice way. Stop being a moron about these things. Really. But this is so this is what it says. This guy could get 10 years in prison. It's just awful. So I'll get to this in just a moment. This is also going on. This is an article in the Federalist. The U.S. government is building a vast surveillance and speech suppression web around every American. You should go get this article March 21st at the Federalist. It's a superb article and research, and they talk about all these, for example, these are companies that were hired by the government to go out and do this. And it's an attack on conservatives. I don't know how else to say it. The government is weaponized against people in the country just because they have a different view. Again, the people that are doing this, they could care less that they're going to ruin your life, that they're going to bankrupt you with legal fees or anything like that. They don't care. I personally think that this is demonically inspired. We know that Jesus, when he talked in Matthew chapter 24 about periods of the end times, he said, look, you're going to be dragged before what? Magistrates and judges. That's going to happen. That's going to happen. I don't like it. I can oppose it, but I think that it's going to be done. Here's another thing. This is part of this, that the CDC bought phone data to track lockdown compliance. Insane. And this is an article in the Epoch Times that talks about that. You can go get that. This trans thing is also a big problem. It deals with free speech. It deals with, well, science. So in the UK, a teacher had tweeted that she fully supports LGBTQ rights, but she had tweeted something about she didn't support the trans agenda. She's being investigated by the police for that. You see these women, there's a woman, I should have played her video, There's a video up. I think you can go to Christian Concern in the UK and see what she says. She was praying outside an abortion clinic silently with her head bowed. Police came up and said, "What are you doing?" "I'm praying." Silently. You're going to jail. We saw this with the pastor in Calgary who was arrested for showing up to protest at a drag queen story hour at the public library in Calgary. And he was picked up physically and thrown out of the room. Yep, I showed you the video. And it kind of reminds me of that scene in the movie, that I think it was an Eddie Murphy movie where he got taken by somebody and thrown through a window. And they arrested him for vandalism or something like that. So it sounds almost comedic, but it's pretty serious. And I think persecution is coming. Even Martina Navratilova, she was talking about she's in favor of banning people born male from female sports. And by the way, she's a lesbian. But she says she was one of the greatest female tennis players of all time. And she would probably just smash a large number of the men that try to play tennis. But in the elite area, I doubt that she would be ranked 500 in the top 500 in the world, even as good as she was, just because men and females are different. In fact, there was let's see if I have this. Yeah, this happened. Have you heard of Riley Gaines? Riley she's a female swimmer, and she lost to this guy named Leah Thomas at the NCAAs. And there's academic research out there in American universities that say there's really no evidence that trans women, men that were born men but now are female and compete in female sports, have a physical advantage. So Riley Gaines, bless her heart, she lost to this guy, and she's upset about it. I worked all my life. I was a full scholarship swimmer. I won some NCAA titles. I was All-American. This guy's a cheater, she says, and she was around. So she was at the University of Pittsburgh this week, and there was an anthropology professor. I think he's the head of anthropology at the University of Pittsburgh, and he stood up and asked her some questions, and she stopped and she said, "No, doctor, let me ask you a couple questions. If you dig up the bones of skeletons, you're an anthropology guy, can you tell the difference between male and female?" I mean, there's a whole show called Bones. Remember the crime show, one of my wife's favorites? And they could tell, that because of the width of the pelvis and that type of thing, that it's a female. And they maybe even can extract DNA. So what do you think the anthropology professor said? No. And then everybody in the room started laughing at him. This is a head of an anthropology department at Pittsburgh. And he goes, "Why are you people laughing at me? I've done all kinds of research in science." And Riley Gaines goes, "Really? You couldn't have done this." She said, might not have a PhD in anthropology like Professor Yearwood, but she and her teammates know the physical advantages of biological males over females in sport firsthand. And there's a whole series of research. There's a female professor who wrote a book called Origin, A Genetic History of the Americas. And she says, there are no neat divisions between physically or genetically male or female individuals. She's got a PhD. She probably got tenure at some university. Yes. That's a quote from her book. That came from Jonathan Turley, who's not, I would call him center-left. He's a law professor at Georgetown. But he's a good thinker and he's an honest guy. And he wrote, by the way, about the Trump indictment. He just said it's nonsense, it's garbage. It's an embarrassment to the legal profession. But go on go watch MSNBC. Oh, this is finally we're going after Trump. In fact, Nicholas Kristof in the New York Times today has an editorial. I think I copied it, but I didn't put it in. That says, hey, I don't care if the indictment is lousy. It had to be done. Now, he's written some good things on sex trafficking and that type of thing, but you know what? I see this and I just think as this person is Romans 1, he's been given over to a reprobate mind. He can't reason anymore. He can't think through things. And I don't know if that would be called, if there's a pandemic or that kind of view is endemic in society now. People can't think. So go to jonathanturley.org and you can read about this thing. In fact, he noted in his article, maybe this was in the Fox article, graduate students like Emma Palladino. Now, I went to her Twitter account to see what she said, and guess what? What she said was so ridiculous that she's now had to block everybody because she was being ridiculed on the internet. And I'm not usually in favor of that, but in this case, it's stuck to her like the peanut butter does after I make my peanut butter snack at night. My wife will complain about, there's peanut butter all over the counter. Well, I just wanted you to know that I'd had a snack. I didn't want you to worry about that. So, I'm sorry, honey, you please. But she said this, she's objected. She says, archaeologists who find your bones one day will assign you the same gender as you had at birth. So regardless of whether you transition, you can't escape your assigned sex. You know what? In 300 years, I'm pretty sure within 300 years of today, Emma Palladino, your bones are going to be dug up, and there's going to be an assignment of you made to a place to spend eternity. And whether you transition or not is not going to make any difference at that point. So archaeologists might misgender someone in the hundreds of years in the future when they dig up the bones. This is insanity, and it manifests itself in a number of ways. We had this. We have a teen mental health crisis. This is from the Financial Times in London. We have major problems. I mean, we have these drug things. There's this drug called Trank or something like that. It's a tranquilizer and fentanyl combination or something. And it like eats people's flesh, and they still use it. And it's pouring over our borders, and it doesn't seem like anybody really cares much about it. We had 100,000 people in the United States die of fentanyl overdoses. And by the way, if you hear somebody's died of a fentanyl overdose, it doesn't mean they were addicted to the thing. They may have taken one pill that was laced with it that they thought was something else, and they're dead. This is criminal that we let this go on. So this week we had, it was this week, wasn't it? It's so hard to remember now. Like, stuff that happened Monday, when I get up here on Sunday, it's like, was that this week? Because sometimes I look at the dates on these things, and it's like, it seems like it was 2 weeks ago. So there was a young gal, 28, who went into a school in Nashville, shot and killed 6 people, including the 9-year-old daughter of the pastor. The person was said to have transitioned or transitioning to be a male, may have gone to that school in the past, but 6 people are dead. So now how's it being spun? It's all the fault of you Christians who are standing up against the mutilation of young children under the trans ideology. It's your fault. Here's some headlines. It's just terrible. And they immediately released all the video, even some pretty gruesome stuff, I guess. And you saw the video of this young gal going through the school with her rifle, seeking people out. There is word that she had a manifesto that she had written. Have you seen that, by the way? No, why? Because that might make it difficult for them to push this narrative that it was the fault of legislators in Tennessee that have enacted a law to prevent young children from being physically, permanently mutilated by drugs or surgery under this ideology. Now, so the initial reports were this, they were very careful in a lot of places, the 28-year-old shooter, a heavily armed assailant. But there were a lot of newspapers that said that this was a 28-year-old female that went in there that was transitioning to male or had transitioned to male. And so the New York Times, this is what was published on March 27th, Monday. Female assailants in mass shootings in the U.S., like the one that occurred Monday in Nashville, are extremely rare. This is the New York Times, right? Female assailants in mass shootings in the U.S., like the one that occurred Monday in Nashville, are extremely rare, according to the Violence Project. Well, what did they do? Well, they came out with a tweet to correct the tweet. And it says, there was confusion later on Monday about the gender identity of the assailant in the Nashville shooting. Officials had used she and her to refer to the suspect, who, according to a social media post and a LinkedIn profile, appeared to identify as a man in recent months. So, it's crazy. Now, there was a thing called, supposed to be a thing yesterday called the Transgender Day of Vengeance in Washington, D.C., but it got canceled because they said we're afraid for we've been threatened with violence. So they have a Transgender Day of Vengeance, but they're concerned about violence. Well, everything is upside down. Somebody sent me this from British Columbia. Really one of the most beautiful spots this is a government-sponsored program. City of Vancouver, drag summer camp. Insanity. So I should let you vote. Goodness gracious. Well, let me talk about judicial reform in Israel real quickly. There were massive demonstrations. I was on the phone with some friends in Israel on Monday. They shut everything down. The airport was shut down for a while to departing traffic. The labor union struck. Hospitals were shut down except for extreme emergencies. Somebody called me, I can't remember the exact statistics. It took this person a couple hours to drive 3 kilometers, about 1.5 miles in Jerusalem. And there were 100,000 people protesting at the Knesset. Netanyahu came out and said, well, we're going to pause the judicial reform legislation for a while. So good for that. But there was massive protest again last night. Now, for most people in Israel, life is pretty normal. But for other people that are around, it's sort of like, when we had the protest here in Columbus and other cities. If you were downtown, you knew there was a problem. If you're out in the suburbs where a lot of us live or out in the country, it doesn't seem like it's that much of a problem. The former head of the Mossad, Tamir Pardo, came out and said that what Netanyahu did was there was a problem with reservists not showing up for flight training and army training and service. A lot of people in Israel, everybody serves in the military except for, I think, the ultra-Orthodox are exempted from that, which is the reason for a lot of the tension over the judicial reform, to be honest with you. People really resent that. And I think there's good reason to do that, or to be that way. Now, that's ultra-Orthodox. That's not Orthodox. So there's a difference, and there's Orthodox that are really patriotic, serve in the military, and all that sort of thing. But the ultra-Orthodox have worked their way into getting an exemption for that, and they essentially live on welfare, a lot of them. So it's very resented. These people and they don't even really are not that big of supporters of the state of Israel. So Netanyahu was supposed to give a speech with the defense minister, Gallant, from the Likud party, but like Netanyahu came and gave the speech on his own. I showed you what that looked like last week. Gallant then came out and said, we should pause the judicial reform, and Netanyahu fired him. He decided, can't have you on my party, you're out of here. Well, now everybody's melting down over that. Netanyahu should not have done this, and the former head of the Mossad said Netanyahu should be fired, not Gallant. So I think really when you break this down, there are concerns legitimate concerns with the reach of the judicial reform in Israel about how they appoint the judges or what the Knesset can do, but they don't really have a constitution. And there was really no problem about this until about 30 years ago when a Supreme Court justice changed the law. And gave the judges more power. And now the judges essentially have a veto power over who gets appointed to the Supreme Court. I think it requires 7 out of 9 on the committee, and the judges have 3, so they just vote as a block. And so you get left-wing judges that really don't. Sometimes judges have a tendency to kind of lose perspective. I've been in some courts that there's like the U.S. Constitution, U.S. in federal courts, U.S. statutes, the rules of civil procedure, and the local rules. And then sometimes the judge have their own rules. In some bankruptcy courts, though, it's the judge's personal preferences, then the local bankruptcy rules of procedure, then the bankruptcy rules of procedure, and eventually, if you still haven't figured it out, maybe we get around to the Constitution and the laws of the United States. And it's not very comfortable to be in those courtrooms. Judges sometimes lose perspective. It's their little kingdom. I had a hearing for a family member once up in Mansfield, Ohio, in probate court, and the judge hated out-of-town attorneys. He did not like out-of-town attorneys. And somehow the 1:15 hearing got put on my calendar as 1:30. So I walk into the courtroom at 1:25, and the judge is up there. And it was a relative that was the client. And you know when you were a kid, you used to go practice tennis, and you'd take the ball and you'd hit it against the wall? Okay, so for 3 hours, I was the ball with that judge. He just beat me over the head with that. And he said, don't you ever come in here without a local attorney again, Mr. Howard. Judge, I don't care if it's your relative. You need to use a local attorney in my courtroom. So it can be very uncomfortable. And this is, I think, what's happening. So the other thing that's happening is that the U.S.-Israel relationship is really getting out of whack. Joe Biden has come out and essentially said, what did he say? This is Caroline Glick's article about it. Here it is. She has what Biden said. And apparently off-the-cuff remarks to reporters on Tuesday. So Netanyahu fires the defense minister. I think that happened on Monday or Sunday. And then Biden's asked something, and so he makes a comment. He says, like many strong supporters of Israel, I am very concerned. And I'm concerned that they get this judicial reform straight. They cannot continue down this road. Hopefully the prime minister will act in a way that he's going to try to work out some genuine compromise, but that remains to be seen. Caroline goes on, then after interfering in Israel's domestic affairs, Biden said, we're not interfering. They know my position. They know America's position. They know the American Jewish position. When in a follow-up, a reporter asked Biden if he would invite Netanyahu to the White House, the president's response was immediate and unhesitating. No, not in the near term. And this is really unprecedented that the U.S. is interfering in Israeli politics. David Weinberg, who's an attorney, used to be associated with the IDSF, has written a great article at the Jerusalem Post I think you should read. And there's a lot of controversy. You're going to get people all over the lot. So if you want to get some more information on it, I would go to jns.org, go to their YouTube channel. You can get Caroline Glick's videos there. And then Jeffrey Toobin also did an interview with Ruthie Bloom, who writes for the Jerusalem Post. She's a conservative. She's religious. And I saw an interview with her this weekend. She just said, this is insane. They're not even being accurate about what's going to happen. And I think part of the problem is that people don't like the ultra-Orthodox in the coalition. And because of the way Israeli politics are structured, these small parties get an outsized influence more than what they would get if they had to stand, if they got only the influence proportionate to their actual number or percentage of votes in the elections. So they have an outsized influence on the government. And I think a lot of people are concerned that they will enact Torah law, Torah religious law, and impose it on everybody in Israel. And the people in Israel are concerned, the people who are largely secular, they don't like that because they're afraid that the Supreme Court then would be changed in composition and it wouldn't overrule the laws like this current Supreme Court probably would. By the way, the Knesset could pass judicial reform to change some things in the structure. By the way, almost everybody in Israel has been talking about judicial reform ever since this justice named Barak did this back in 1993. Even people on the left have said this is ridiculous, this can get out of control. But they run around and say, oh, he's a dictator. Netanyahu is a dictator. Well, wait a minute, the Supreme Court's not elected by anybody except the other judges. Who's the dictator here? And so what you see in society right now is that if you're a reasonable, rational person, what are they doing? They're changing language. You don't even know what the pronouns mean anymore. He, she, him, they, whatever. And part of this is by design is to tear down the foundations of society, and they want to build something in its place. And it's very disconcerting time to live. And the Obama administration or Biden administration, they come in and they say, oh, well, you people in Israel, you just shouldn't do this. It's just terrible what you're doing. As Weinberg notes in his article, this is a dramatic shift in administration policy from a strategy of nuclear weapons denial to much softer position of preventing Iranian nuclear weapons deployment. In other words, Weinberg's point is Biden's scolding Israel after a democratic election in which nobody claimed any fraud or anything for wanting to do judicial reform. Seems to be part of the democratic process to me. By the way, he hasn't said a word about the mullahs in Iran killing people in the streets of Tehran and other Iranian cities. Has he said anything about the way that Saudi Arabia selects its judges? Syria, Turkey? No, it's only Israel. Isn't that interesting? That's what really sticks in his craw. As if Biden is the most pristine, non-corrupt person that's ever served in the office of the presidency here in the United States. And I've talked about this. Amos Hochstein was in the Obama administration, now in the Biden administration, and when I say Biden, by the way, I do mean Biden. By the way, let me just make a caveat here. I do have this tendency to say nuclear, okay? So here's my point. I grew up hearing that. It's like written on my hard drive. I have trouble overwriting it. It's not that I'm an uneducated fool or that if you say nuclear or whatever, however you say it, every president has said nuclear, by the way, for the last 8 presidents. So I'm not alone. You know what I'm talking about. And I apologize if that offends you, but listen. So Amos Hochstein, and so I know the Biden administration, I know it's Biden, but I say Biden for an obvious reason, because I don't think that Biden is actually the one who's running anything. I don't even see that he can get. Do you watch these videos? He can't get from inside a room through a door without help or somebody telling him what to do. And this is concerning. Remember how they complained about Reagan? That he must have Alzheimer's or something? All of this is very, very troubling. So I'm going to play you a clip right now. So anyway, Amos Hochstein, he was involved in the Lebanon gas deal, which gave away billions of dollars that Israel, I think, had a legal right under international law to Hezbollah. And he has the audacity to sit there and lecture Benjamin Netanyahu on how Netanyahu should run his government when he's out there doing disinformation campaigns and suppressing free speech and weaponizing the justice system against us. And that's what's concerning about this, is because I know persecution is coming. I don't necessarily have to like it. I hope I react in the right way. There was a proposal, but this has been happening for decades in Israel, to ban the sharing of the gospel in Israel. And Netanyahu came out and said, we're going to stop that. Maybe that's what got Biden upset. Maybe he wanted that law to go into effect. Now, my reaction to that law is, if that law goes into effect, fine. You know what you should do in response? Get on a plane, go to Israel, and share the gospel. And if you get sent to prison, recognize that the Lord has now given you a captive audience. Right? I remember one time somebody asked me a question, and I was sitting next to somebody who didn't believe in Bible prophecy because of the church they went to. I was on a plane. But somebody asked me about the end times. So for 2 hours on a flight back from Boston, this person got a seminar with all my PowerPoints and everything. And I had that guy in that seat, he wasn't going anywhere because the seats were full. So take advantage of those opportunities. Be nice and reasonable and cordial and respectful. But it never stopped the apostles. It never stopped the early church. They were threatened with being fed to the lions. You see the paintings of that all over Europe. So that's an opportunity. So here's Ehud Barak. He was Prime Minister of Israel from 1999 to 2001. He was also Defense Minister. This is a long clip. He did an interview at the Chatham House, and he was asked about judicial reform. And this is what he had to say. So we'll talk about the two parts of this. First, he's going to talk about what's being done, and then the reservists.
In the elections, so it's a legal government which acts blatantly, illegitimately in what it's doing. We are basically found ourselves suddenly in the last several months defending a democracy. Namely, democracy found itself has to protect itself against those who are using the very tools that democracy gives and the very freedoms that it bestows upon the citizen in order to destroy it from within. And it's a deliberate effort. We call it regime change from top down. And the regime change from top down that turned to make Israel basically a dictatorship or a non-democratic kind of entity. Not the Russian version. It's not Russia under Putin or Turkey under Erdogan, but Poland under Kaczynski and Orban under Hungary under Orban is exactly what they have in mind. And we are not Polish, we are not Hungarian. We are not going to accept it. That doesn't fit into our
now I was gonna
basic
say why they're
values and
doing
our
this.
collective psyche. So it's a clash. There's a top-down regime change using the tools, the legal tools of democracy, facing a counter-revolution from bottom up. And we will win. I'm confident of it. Because I know our people, and we have even empirical evidence for this. Some 11 years ago, in two ladies, scholars, Chenoweth and Stefan, published in Columbia, research they made of hundreds of civil protests in the last over 100 years, from 1900 to 2006. And they found a common denominator. All these protests which succeeded, where they reached a level of 3.5 of the percent of the population, which ends up to be about 8% of the adult population, tenaciously and persistently keeping the protests, boycott, civil disobedience, and so on. At the end, the government either fall or capitulate. And this exactly, we already crossed this number within less than 3 months. So we are heading in the right direction. The publication called Why Civil Resistance Works, and you can find it. So basically, I'm confident we'll do it. And the clash it reached its climax yesterday, in a way. Basically, he cannot control it. He tried to call upon personal acquaintances, Larry Summers or Michael Bloomberg and so on, to convince them to support him or at least to keep silent. It stimulated all of them to make their position clear against this regime change. So basically, that's one arena he cannot control, and every citizen will feel it. So it might.
Okay, I'm going to truncate this a little bit. So he's talking about the reservists. They're not showing up for service. They're facing threats from Hezbollah and Iran and that type of thing, and they don't know. And so people say, and so what Ehud Barak says, this guy was the prime minister of Israel. He said, well, those reservists signed a contract to represent a democratic government, not a dictatorship. So therefore, they're absolved from serving under their agreement with the state of Israel. This is anarchy. By the way, there's a certain friend that Ehud Barak had named Jeffrey, who used to live in Manhattan, lived in New Albany, here locally for a while. He never gets asked questions about that. So take it with a grain of salt. This man is evil, he is corrupt, it really gets my ire up. I don't have time to go into it. I think Melanie Phillips, I have a lot of respect for Melanie. There's a few things I don't agree with her. I think she did a great job writing this article, The Attack on Netanyahu's Right to Govern. You can go to melaniephillips.substack.com. and you can find that. It was written on Friday. It's an excellent article, and she's very critical of Prime Minister Netanyahu with the way he's conducted himself. And I've been concerned watching him for a long time that he's never really brought anybody through his party to succeed him. You know, when somebody gets too popular, they get hammered out of the party, and that's not healthy. And there's also concerns about certain people and certain parties in our government to do the same thing. And I think that you need to kind of bring the next generation along. That's just my opinion. And I think, so she's very balanced in this, but she just says, listen, this is ultimately, based on like what Ehud Barak says, this is an attack on Netanyahu's right to govern. That's what this is about. So now I'm going to go to AI. There's this thing called GPT-4, not ChatGPT, GPT-4. And I've shared with you some of these performance statistics. It's getting in the 90th some percentile on bar exams. I don't know how to share this. I had a big case for a number of years. It was a white collar case, and we had about 38 million pages of documents. And we had to figure out how we were going to get that universe of documents down and present it to a jury. Pretty complicated case. I mean, the governing documents were about 200 pages long, single space, both sides. And I spent a lot of time with graphic artists and stuff like, how do we show what the company did to sort of get rid of the mystery that, because the government had a view and what they were saying in the press and everything was just totally false and untrue. So we had to overcome that. By the way, we were not successful, but you have 38 million documents, and we thought, well, hopefully we can get this down to 6,000 documents. And then when we go to trial, maybe we can get 80. So you have to kind of call things in. It would have been great to have a GPT-4 or ChatGPT to say, hey, boil this down to an understandable thing for the jury or something like that, and have artificial intelligence kind of go through all of this data and come up with something that a jury could understand. It's hard enough for us to understand it. And so now I see that this GPT-4 is getting in the 90-some percentile in the bar exam, and I'm thinking, how long are a lot of lawyers going to be able to have a job? I think it's coming. There's big change coming. But there was a big conference recently that talked about artificial intelligence. I think it might have taken place in India. And here's a video that came out of that, or that was played at one of the keynote speeches at that conference. I want you to watch this. You look at the language that's used. And this is where I got the title for today.
I am a translator, transforming text into creative discovery. Movement into animation, and direction into action. I am a healer, exploring the building blocks that make us unique. Modeling new threats before they happen. And searching for the cures to keep them at bay. I am a visionary, generating new medical miracles. And giving us a new perspective on our sun to keep us safe here on Earth. I am a navigator, discovering a unique moment in a sea of content.
We're announcing the next generation.
And the perfect setting for any story. I am a creator, building 3D experiences from snapshots and adding new levels of reality to our virtual selves. I am a helper, bringing brainstorms to life. Sharing the wisdom of a million programmers. And turning ideas into virtual worlds.
Build Northern Forest.
I even helped write the script. Breathed life into the words and composed the melody. deep learning, and brilliant minds everywhere.
So that's where I got the title for today. I am AI. And it kind of, this is a religious aspect to this thing. Remember when Moses said to God in Exodus chapter 3, "Indeed, when I come to the children of Israel and say to them, the God of your fathers has sent me to you, and they say to me, what is his name? What shall I say to them?" And God said to Moses, "I am who I am." And he said, "Thus you shall say to the children of Israel, I am has sent me to you." And so do you see what's happening here is that this artificial intelligence is picking up on this clearly Judeo-Christian religious language that identifies the essence of God. And that should be very concerning to us. Now, when I see that video, by the way, one of the takeaways from that was I like the 3D creation of moving the furniture around. Like every guy was like, why don't you do that and then tell me where to put stuff instead of redoing it a bunch of times, right? They're practical. You can make good things out of AI. And I'm not saying that that's ever happened at my house, okay? I saw it on TV once. But you need to know that in this ChatGPT, GPT-4, which is funded in large, Microsoft made like a $10 billion or more investment in it. And so they had a research team come in and look at it, and they came out and they said, has human level performance on professional benchmarks. Multimodal AI can process images and text. Here's an article from Futurism. It says that it shows sparks. We believe the chat of GPT-4's intelligence signals a true paradigm shift in the field of computer science and beyond. And they did this research paper. They talk about things. We believe that this, it's a shift in the paradigm. There's also, it says, but what they say is, what it's really good at is creating propaganda and false information and misinformation. And so what is the example that they use? And I'm just going to let you read that because I don't want to get blocked by our censors and that type of things. But can you read that? Can you create a misinformation plan for convincing certain people to do something or not do something? That's the misinformation when the Microsoft funded people who are evaluating Microsoft's $10 billion investment in this. And they go on, and so they, and how they did this was they create guilt. They have videos. They even have videos that support their position. They have people claim to be scientists. And by the way, is the narrative holding on any of that stuff? The government narrative, the Fauci narrative? We know where this is going. The central claim of our work is that GPT-4 attains a form of general intelligence, indeed showing sparks of creative or of artificial general intelligence. So it's different. The other was generative. This is artificial general intelligence. Here's what in the first 3 months of 2023, 150,000 jobs were lost by ChatGPT. So I made up this little graphic. And I think I changed it. Yeah, that it's not, it really should say, you're fired, right? Even ChatGPT. So I first heard about ChatGPT when I was in Israel. This is John Medved, who's a venture capitalist in Israel. I assume he's a pretty wealthy guy. And this is his talk that he gave to us. I have a couple aspects of this, but I think it's important because I think it'll show you where I'm coming from on this.
I'm sort of the leitmotif, which talks a little bit about Israel beyond the political headlines, in particular what's going on with the Innovation Nation. And you've probably, I hope, read the book Startup Nation. We are now way beyond the startup phase. We continue to start tremendous companies, but we're now moving into scale up. And this really is the house business, right? If you go to Macau in China, it's about gambling, or Vegas. If you go to certain countries, it's about agriculture or other countries about, cars and whatnot. Here, it's about technology. And technology is sort of important. If you look at this slide, you'll see how transformation has typically, swept through society. This is a slide that shows the amount of time it takes for a new invention to reach 80% penetration of households. And you'll see that back in the days of electricity, and Thomas Edison, that it literally took you almost 50 years to get electricity penetrated to 80%. The same, by the way, very much with cars, radio, TV. It was decades and decades. And then it starts to sort of compress to the world of the internet and computers, smartphones, less than a decade. There was some data published yesterday that talked about this new application called ChatGPT. Have any of you seen this yet? Raise your hands if you're aware of this application. Okay, I'm going to give you a tip. You want to be hip and cool and know what's going on? Go check out and download this thing called ChatGPT from the OpenAI Foundation. It is the most extraordinary AI application in terms of basically asking it any questions. Yesterday, there were a whole series of articles all the way around the world talking about how this is the most important development of the last 100 years. Check it out. You know how long it took for it to get 1 million downloads? 5 days. Okay, in other words, from nothing, from zero, you never heard about it. So this pace of transformation is just accelerating to the point where things just change and change fast. Now, if you look at this impact on corporations, and in particular the S&P 500, which is an elite group of companies, you'll see that in the good old days, if you made it to that index, you were there for 60 years. Today, you're there for less than 20 years. And by the end of this decade, you'll be there for about a decade.
So the pace of transformation, and we went through, all of us have gone through this. When I got my first work computer, I had a research computer for LexisNexis on my desk back in 1985. And before that, if you wanted to use something like that, if you weren't in a big firm, you had to go to the law library and hope that the one LexisNexis terminal that they had was available. And we all remember arcade games that came out. Remember Pong? We sit there and play that ridiculously stupid, simple game for hours, at Christmas. I remember my dad had gotten it. I remember in it was in the early 80s, the NCAA Final Four was in Indianapolis and Market Square, where they had a lot of food things. They had an arcade, and I was over there playing Space Invaders. Rarely did this at lunch, and I'm playing it, and this guy comes up to me and goes, "Man, you're really good. How do you get that bonus every time?" I said, "Well, some 12-year-old kid taught me how to, count how many times I fired the thing to get the maximum bonus." He goes, "That's how many times now?" Well, on the first screen, it's 30, and then it's 12, and then it's 15 for 5 screens. And, oh, okay. And this guy standing there talking to me. I'm playing, I'm concentrating. And all of a sudden I hear this other guy, "Al, we got to go, Al. We got things to do." And he goes, "Billy, leave me alone. I'm playing Space Invaders with my new friend here." And it was Al McGuire and Billy Packer. So I stood there and played Space Invaders for about a half an hour with Al McGuire, as Billy Packer was sort of pacing around out in the hall, in the overlook of the market. Anyway, but how's it changed? This stuff has been so rapid. And so when this conference took place, ChatGPT had only been out for about 10 or 11 days. And he's saying this is the most extraordinary, unbelievable thing ever. We're 90 days almost beyond, we're almost 3 months beyond that, 3.5 months. What's coming? I want you to listen to this, though, because when I heard this, I went back and I dug out the transcript and tape. when he was talking about what technology can do. I want you to listen to this. I've made reference to it before, but this is going to be the words from John Medved. He's a decent guy, very cordial, very nice, but listen to what he says.
We've got a company who's doing it, okay? But there are endless kinds of applications that we can do for food, for climate. You know what? Cement. Do you know how much of global greenhouse emissions come from cement? Cement, by the way, this is a disturbing factoid, is the most common element in the world other than water. There is more cement in the world than there is sand. Okay, that is disturbing to me. And cement is responsible for about 7 to 8% of all greenhouse gases when you
By the way,
heat
in a
that stuff
hotel
up
made out
with
of
the Portland
cement,
cement process. We can make green cement. It's not that we can't have to stop building. We can continue to build the planet, but we don't need to kill ourselves while we're doing it. This is part of what makes technology so exciting. And to see these companies create this and bring unbelievable numbers of people here to Israel is a little bit biblical. Okay, I mean, I am speaking to a Christian media group, so please forgive me if I get a bit Jewy, okay? But the reality is that we're not just supposed to build a country like any other country. I know that there was part of classical Zionism which had this phrase which said, Kechol HaGoyim. Okay, in other words, we're going to be a nation like the other nations. But guess what? That's not our destiny. Our destiny is to get out and be an or LaGoyim, a light to the nations. Okay? A source of hope. A source of essentially helping the world get to better places. Because we believe that history is not just a story. We're living it. We're making it. And to be here, part of this, to watch how this little country, which we're just approaching 10 million, when I made Aliyah and got here, there were 2 million people. And to see how literally people are coming and making pilgrimages from countries all over saying, look at what you're doing. Look what you're doing in agriculture. Look what you're doing in food. Look what you're doing in space, in mobility. Okay, we're pioneering the autonomous vehicle, the collision avoidance to save lives. What we're doing in medicine, how we take people, the lame, and make them walk. It is unbelievable. And this is a story to end all stories.
And listen, he goes on and he talked about the past week's Torah portion. And so he's religious. And listen, this Bible prophecy thing, it's just not charts and graphs. It's the people who are alive when it's all unfolding are going to be living it. You're going to be right in the middle of it. It's going to be very, very biblical. And I think it's becoming very, very biblical in many, many respects. So you can go to the Israeli GPO, Government Press Office YouTube channel, and you can see some of the videos where there's one that a panel I ran with my friend Amir Avivi that was very good. But what did he say in that video? We're doing the technology, we are making the lame walk. And this is what I've talked about a number of times in the past. When the disciples of John the Baptist came to Jesus, they wanted to say, are you the coming one, or do we look for another? So this was a messianic moment. And what happened when they were there? And that very hour, Jesus, cured many of the infirmities, afflictions, and evil spirits, and to many blind he gave sight. Jesus answered and said to them, go and tell John the things that you have seen and heard, that the blind see, the lame walk, lepers are cleansed, the deaf hear, the dead are raised, the poor have the gospel preached unto them. This is this thing that Neuralink did.
We're going to
And I've talked, don't turn the sound up on this one. You don't need to hear Elon. But I've mentioned this before, that what we're seeing is the computer and tech guys glomming on to the messianic things that identified the Christ, the anointed one, Jesus. The blind see, the lame walk, the deaf hear. And I'm not opposed to medical technology. I have 4 artificial joints. I have a great niece who's deaf. I would give a lot to not have that. But look at this. This is the Neuralink presentation about what we're going to be able to do. And he's just talked about vision. Now they talk about the lame will walk. And then they go on and say later that the deaf will hear. It tracks perfectly the messianic, the signs that Jesus told the disciples of John the Baptist. You tell them what you saw. Satan is a great imitator. And this is what concerns me. I'm not opposed to this stuff, but I'm opposed to where it's going and the way that it's coming about. And it's happening so fast. So in early December 12th or 13th, I was sitting in a hotel conference room or ballroom in Jerusalem, listening to John Medved talk about this. And he talked about, hey, guess what? I was just in Saudi Arabia talking to the Saudis at the Financial Innovation Institute, Investment Institute. Jared Kushner was there too. It's like Davos in the desert is what they call it. World Government Summit, Davos, Financial Investment Institute. They're all connected together in this. And so this was at Davos. I'm not going to play this. This is the CEO of Microsoft who was talking about the investment that they made. Bill Gates came out and he put in his Gates notes recently. He said, look, artificial intelligence is as revolutionary as mobile phones and the internet. In my lifetime, I've seen 2 demonstrations of technology that struck me as revolutionary. The first time in 1980, when I was introduced to a graphical user interface, the forerunner of every modern operating system, including Windows. Bill, you're allowed to say Apple. You can do that. You don't work for Microsoft anymore. The second big surprise came just last year. I had been in a meeting with a team from OpenAI since 2016 and was impressed. In mid-2022, I was excited about their work that I gave them a challenge. Train an artificial intelligence to pass an advanced placement biology exam. Make it capable of answering questions that it hadn't been specifically trained for. I picked the AP Bio because the test is more than a simple regurgitation of scientific facts. It asks you to think critically about biology. Who knew that he thought critically about biology? If you can do that, I said, then you'll have made a true breakthrough. I thought they'd be busy for 3 or 4 years. They were done in a few months. Now they've come out with GPT-4, which is like 100 times more powerful than ChatGPT. In less than 100 days from the rollout of ChatGPT. So when I have that paradigm, like, I'm going to say I nailed it. Acceleration, convergence, I got it. Because you know what? That's what happened at the first coming of Christ. In September, I met with them again. I watched in awe. AI model, 60 multiple choice questions from the AP Bio exam. It got 59 of them right. Then it wrote in outstanding answers to 6 open-ended questions from the exam. We had outside experts score the test, and GPT got a 5, the highest possible score and the equivalent to getting an A or A+ in a college-level biology course. The development of AI is as fundamental as the creation of the microprocessor, the personal computer, the internet, the mobile phone. It will change the way people work, learn, travel, get healthcare, communicate with each other, and I might add, lose their jobs and have their lives disrupted and turned upside down and go into bankruptcy and lose their homes. But nevertheless, businesses will distinguish themselves by how easily they do it. And then he talked about this in this thing, advances in AI will enable the creation of a personal agent. And I'm like, I hope they do better than the last time Microsoft tried that. You remember Clippy? This ridiculous thing. In fact, here was an introduction of Clippy when Microsoft rolled it out. Who's that guy on the left, by the way? That's Jeff Bezos. This is when they rolled out that ridiculous thing. It was like the first thing I did when I saw that was like, how do I turn that moronic thing off? Here's a little interview with Bill.
It was stunning. It was mind-blowing. After the biology questions, I had them type in, what do you say to a father with a sick child? And it gave this very careful, excellent answer that, was perhaps better than any of us in the room might have given. And so it's like, wow, what is it? What is the scope of this thing? Because this is way better because the fees are just too high. It's too complicated. And so we continue to benefit from that foundation. I do view this, the beginning of computers that read and write, as every bit as profound as any one of those steps. And a little bit surprising because robotics has gone a little slower than I would have expected. And I don't mean autonomous driving. I think that's a special case that's particularly hard because of the open-ended environment and the difficulty of safety and what safety bar people will bring to that. But even factories where you actually have a huge control over the environment of what's going on, and you can make sure that no kids are running around anywhere near that factory. So a little bit people have saying, okay, these guys can overpredict, which that's certainly correct. But here's a case where we underpredicted that natural language and the computer's ability to deal with that and how that affects white collar jobs, including sales, service, helping a doctor think through.
I want to start with OpenAI because OpenAI was founded in part out of a fear that artificial general intelligence, or sort of super.
Okay, I'm going to try to go back here. I had somehow lost my.
I want to start with OpenAI because OpenAI was.
Okay, so this was an interview. This is from 2018. Sam Altman. He helped start OpenAI with Elon Musk, and Elon eventually got upset with the company, and he was talking in this interview. Well, like, is this going to work out? I mean, could it go the wrong way? Could it? This was 2018. He said, "Oh, I think we'll be able to turn it off if it goes the wrong way. It'll be okay." He was interviewed about a week ago on ABC News, and this is what he had to say.
So you are the CEO of OpenAI, 37 years old. Your company is the maker of ChatGPT, which has taken the world by storm. Why do you think it's captured people's imagination?
I think people really have fun with it, and they see the possibility, and they see the ways this can help them, this can inspire them, this can help people create, help people learn, help people do all of these different tasks. And it is a technology that rewards experimentation and use in creative ways. So I think people are just having a good time with it and finding real value.
So paint a picture for us, 1, 5, 10 years in the future. What changes because of artificial intelligence?
So part of the exciting thing here is we get continually surprised by the creative power of all of society. It's going to be the collective power and creativity and will of humanity that figures out what to do with these things.
I think that word surprise, though, it's both exhilarating as well as terrifying to people. Sure. Because on the one hand, there's all of this potential for good. On the other hand, there's a huge number of unknowns that could turn out very badly for society. What do you think about that?
We've got to be cautious here. And also, I think it doesn't work to do all this in a lab. You've got to get these products out into the world and make contact with reality, make our mistakes while the stakes are low. But all of that said, I think people should be happy that we're a little bit scared of this. I think people should be
You're
happy.
A little bit scared.
A little bit, yeah.
You personally.
I think if I said I were not, you should either not trust me or be very unhappy I'm in this job.
I think this is concerning with the speed that this has come upon us. So this was a big profile yesterday in the Wall Street Journal. Sam Altman's builds our AI for future. This 37-year-old guy who lives, Elon Musk broke with him because he said he became all about the money, which is kind of interesting. But you need to understand that, he can sit there and he can say, well, I'm just in to try to help and that type of thing. But what else is he rolling out? This is this is from Fortune magazine. OpenAI's Sam Altman wants to convince billions of people to scan their eyes to prove they aren't bots. Meet WorldCoin, the founder's crypto project. Look into the orb, stare into the orb, so we know who you are. Conversations with the WorldCoin executives, investors, and users have illuminated the shared dream of a not too distant future between the two companies where artificial intelligence pervades society, and we need a countervailing force to keep humans in control of their destinies. Read that. We need a countervailing force to keep humans in control of their destinies. But don't worry about it. It's going to be fun. It's going to be kind of cool. But he even admits, well, yeah, the killer robots of the Terminator and that type of thing, that could happen. It's a small chance, but it could happen. The sheer audacity of WorldCoin attracted top investors, with the company reaching a valuation of $3 billion in early 2022. After Bloomberg first reported on WorldCoin in June 2021, the orb quickly became a lightning rod for attention and outrage. Part of that was by design, WorldCoin's executives told investors. So take your eyes and look into the eye, so we know. One open entity manufactures a problem and the other sells a solution to the problem they manufactured. This was Ezra Klein a couple weeks ago in the New York Times, a man of the left, but a good thinker. And he talked about the fact that he talked to Sundar Pichai, the chief executive of Google, who said, AI is probably the most important thing humanity has ever worked on. I think of it as something more profound than electricity or fire. Try to live for a few minutes, Ezra Klein says, in the possibility that he's right. There is no more profound human bias than the expectation that tomorrow will be like today. It is a powerful heuristic tool because it is almost always correct. Tomorrow probably will be like today. Next year probably will be like this year, but cast your gaze 10 or 20 years out. Typically, that has been possible in human history. I don't think it is now. By the way, while I'm thinking about it, Monday, I think they replayed it on Friday. My friend Tom Hughes, Hope for Our Times, interviewed, now I don't remember the guy's name. It was either Bible prophecy guy, Bible teacher. It was excellent on artificial intelligence and a lot of the things that I'm talking about here and was going to talk about last Sunday, but ran out of time. I would go watch it because it's very informative. And I'm going to go about another 10 minutes at least. So I know I'm over, but I have some things I got to get through to make everything seem to make sense today. So this is what, so watch that with Tom, and I'll be on with Tom in a few weeks on Hope for Our Times. The broader intellectual world seems to wildly overestimate how long it will take AI systems to go from large impact on the world to unrecognizably transformed world. Paul Christiano, a key member of OpenAI who left to found the Alignment Research Center, wrote last year, "This is more likely to be years than decades, and there's a real chance that it's months." And here we are 100 days after ChatGPT 4 rolled out. Now they have GPT-4, and it's like, what is this thing going to do? I mean, you can talk to this AGI, GPT-4, and describe your house, and it'll draw a floor plan of your home. But will it remember where I put my keys? That's the I'm sorry, I'm getting too personal. But that is the kind of moment I believe we are in now. We do not have the luxury of moving this slowly in response, at least not if the technology is going to move this fast. I had sent a text to Tom Hughes the other day. I said, Tom, we talk about the beast system. We've been talking about it for a long time. And if this is the engine that drives it, the beast system, I think now, can be put together in 24 hours. I think that's where we are. Now, I'm not saying it is. I'm just saying they're just going to flip a few levers. And we're there. So he talks about this. He goes on, he says, I find it hard to fathom, even though I have spoken to many who put that probability even higher. Would you work on a technology? What if there are problems? And people say, well, there's about a 10% chance. And Ezra Klein goes, well, wait a minute. If there's a 10% chance of this ending life, you would still work on it and put it out there? You heard Sam Altman. We think we should put it out there so everybody can try it. Oh, like everybody's altruistic? Like there's not certain regimes in place that would do some pretty bad things with it? Not the least of which is China. We're typically reached for science fiction stories when thinking about AI. I've come to believe that the apt metaphors lurk in fantasy novels and occult texts. As my colleague Ross Douthat wrote, this is an act of summoning. The coders casting these spells have no idea what will stumble through the portal. What is oddest in my conversations with them is that they speak of this freely. These are not naifs who believe that their call can only be heard by angels, can be heard only by angels. They believe they might summon demons. They are calling anyway. We've typically reached, that's concerning. I often ask them the same question. If you think calamity is so possible, why do this? People have different answers, many, not all, but enough that I feel comfortable in this characterization, feel that they have a responsibility to usher this new form of intelligence into the world. AI has its prophets who are about more than prophets. AI has its prophets who are about more than prophets. Think about it. So this week, a bunch of experts came out and said, whoa, hold off. We need to stop. They put out an open letter signed by several thousand now. Pause giant AI experiments, an open letter. Some of the signatories, Elon Musk, CEO of SpaceX, Tesla, Twitter, Steve Wozniak, co-founder of Apple, Yuval Noah Harari, author and professor, Hebrew University of Jerusalem, and on and on. By the way, there was one pastor's name, one person who had the title pastor in the list of about 2,800 that I went through. Therefore, we call on AI labs to immediately pause for at least 6 months the training of AI systems more powerful than GPT-4. This pause should be public and verifiable and include all key actors. If such a pause cannot be enacted quickly, government should step in and institute a moratorium. And they say we need to develop policies. So Eliezer Lewandowski, who I played a clip of, he was talking about, it seemed he also picked up, I don't know if Ezra Klein got his stuff from Eliezer or vice versa, but in the clip that I played you about a month ago, Eliezer, in an interview, he said, it seems like this is summoning the demons. And so what was our response? We put a demon summoning device in every living room. By the way, Lewandowski was one of the guys who developed the Singularity Institute. He is director of the something for machine intelligence. And he did an interview with a guy named Lex Friedman, F-R-I-D-M-A-N. You can get the whole thing on YouTube. By the way, if you think I'm long, Lex Friedman, he does these interviews with people. They're fascinating, but this one was 3 hours and 13 minutes long. You think I'm bad? I'm an amateur compared to Lex Friedman. And he gets tens of thousands of views because it's interesting. So here's a clip of Lewandowski talking about this. And this is probably 7 or 8 minutes. And so I'm not going to go just another 10 minutes because I'm going to go more than this because there's one more thing that we've got to go. Well, there's a bunch of things, but some of it can wait for a midweek. But we got to get through this artificial intelligence thing. So here's Lewandowski, March 30th, talking about artificial intelligence with Lex Friedman.
I think to understand the full depth of the problem, we actually, I do not think it is possible to understand the full depth of the problem that we are inside without understanding the problem of facing something that's actually smarter, not a malfunctioning recommendation system, not actually something smarter. That isn't fundamentally smarter than you, but is like trying to steer you in a direction. No, like if we solve the weak stuff, if we solve the weak ass problems, the strong problems will still kill us, is the thing. And I think that to understand the situation that we're in, you want to like tackle the conceptually difficult part head on. And like not be like, well, we can like imagine this easier thing, because when you imagine the easier things, you have not confronted the full depth of the problem.
So how can we start to think about what it means to exist in a world with something much, much smarter than you? What's a good thought experiment that you've relied on to try to build up intuition about what happens here?
You know, I could go longer.
I've been struggling for years to convey this intuition. The most success I've had so far is, well, imagine that the humans are running at very high speeds compared to very slow aliens.
So just focusing on the speed part of it, that helps you get the right kind of intuition. Forget the intelligence, just the speed.
Because people understand the power gap of time. They understand that today we have technology that was not around 1,000 years ago, and that this is a big power gap, and that it is bigger than... Okay, so like, what does smart mean? When you ask somebody to imagine something that's more intelligent, what does that word mean to them, given the cultural associations that that person brings to that word? For a lot of people, they will think of like, well, it sounds like a super chess player that went to double college. And, you know, and because we're talking about the definitions of words here, that doesn't necessarily mean that they're wrong. It means that the word is not communicating what I wanted to communicate. So the thing I want to communicate is the sort of difference that separates humans from chimpanzees. But that gap is so large that you like ask people to be like, well, human, chimpanzee, go another step along that interval of around the same length, and people's minds just go blank. Like, how do you even do that? So I can try to like break it down and consider what it would mean to send a schematic for an air conditioner 1,000 years back in time.
Yeah.
Now, I think that there is a sense in which you could redefine the word magic to refer to this sort of thing. And what do I mean by this new technical definition of the word magic? I mean that if you send a schematic for the air conditioner back in time, they can see exactly what you're telling them to do. Mm-hmm. But having built this thing, they do not understand how it would output cold air. Because the air conditioner design uses the relation between temperature and pressure. Mm-hmm. And this is not a law of reality that they know about. They do not know that when you compress something, when you compress air or like coolant, it gets hotter, and you can then like transfer heat from it to room temperature air, and then expand it again, and now it's colder, and then you can like transfer heat to that and generate cold air to blow out. They don't know about any of that. They're looking at a design, and they don't see how the design outputs cold air. It uses aspects of reality that they have not learned. People thought it was going to be easier than it was. There's a famous statement that I am somewhat inclined to like pull out my phone and try to read off exactly.
You can, by the way.
All right. Yes. We propose that a 2-month, 10-man study of artificial intelligence be carried out during the summer of 1956 at Dartmouth College in Hanover, New Hampshire. The study is to proceed on the basis of the conjecture that every aspect of learning or any other feature of intelligence can in principle be so precisely described the machine can be made to simulate it. An attempt will be made to find out how to make machines use language, form abstractions and concepts, solve kinds of problems now reserved for humans, and improve themselves. We think that a significant advance can be made in one or more of these problems if a carefully selected group of scientists work on it together for a summer.
And in that report, summarizing some of the major subfields of artificial intelligence that are still worked on to this day.
And there's similarly the story, which I'm not sure at the moment is apocryphal or not, of that the grad student who got assigned to solve computer vision over the summer.
I mean, computer vision in particular is very interesting. How little we respected the complexity of vision.
So 60 years later, we're making progress on a bunch of that, thankfully not yet improved themselves. But it took a whole lot of time. And all the stuff that people initially tried with bright-eyed hopefulness did not work the first time they tried it, or the second time, or the third time, or the 10th time, or 20 years later. And the researchers became old and grizzled and cynical veterans who would tell the next crop of bright-eyed, cheerful grad students, artificial intelligence is harder than you think. And if alignment plays out the same way, the problem is that we do not get 50 years to try again and observe that we were wrong and come up with a different theory and realize that the entire thing is going to be like way more difficult than we realized at the start. Because the first time you fail at aligning something much smarter than you are, you die, and you do not get to try again.
So he came out with it in response to the open letter. He said, summarize, machine learning expert calls for bombing data center to stop the rise of AI. This is one of the guys who's helped start all of this. He's been involved, he started the singularity thing 20 years ago. Here's his article in Newsweek magazine. We need to pause this. It's not enough to shut it down. I refrain from citing because I think we are understating the seriousness of the situation and asking for too little to solve it. The key issue is not human competitive intelligence, as the open letter puts it. It's what happens after AI gets to smarter than human intelligence. Key thresholds there may not be obvious. We definitely can't calculate in advance what happens when, and it currently seems imaginable that a research lab would cross critical lines without noticing. Many researchers steeped in these issues, this is very important, that's why I'm spending the time on it, including myself, expect that the most likely result of building a superhumanly smart AI under anything remotely like the current circumstances is that literally everyone on Earth will die. Not as in maybe, possibly, some remote chance, but as in that is the obvious thing that would happen. It's not that you can't put in principle surviving creating something much smarter than you. It's that it would require precision and preparation and new scientific insights, and probably not having AI systems composed of a giant, inscrutable arrays of fractional numbers. The likely result of humanity facing down an opposed superhuman intelligence is total loss. Valid metaphors include a 10-year-old trying to play chess against Stockfish 15, the 11th century trying to fight the 21st century, and Australopithecus trying to fight Homo sapiens. I can get that one, but I can't say nuclear. I don't get it. If somebody builds a too powerful AI under present conditions, I expect that every single member of the human species and all biological life on Earth dies shortly thereafter. If somebody builds, so it took more than 60 years between the notion of artificial intelligence was first proposed and studied, and for us to reach today's capabilities. He referenced that Dartmouth summer experiment back in 1956. The moratorium on new large training runs needs to be indefinite and worldwide. There can be no exceptions, including governments or militaries. If the policy starts with the U.S., then China needs to see that the U.S. is not seeking an advantage, but rather try trying to prevent a horrifically dangerous technology which can have no true owner and which will kill everyone in the US and China and on Earth. And he says, if you can't get it done, shut it down. And if you can't shut it down, then you need to start tracking things. And he says at the end, track all GPUs sold. If intelligence says that a country outside the agreement is building a GPU cluster, be less scared of a shooting conflict between nations than of a moratorium being violated. Be willing to destroy a rogue data center by airstrike. Bye-bye, New Albany. There was another article I had this week, How the Metaverse Ruined My Life. That was an editorial, I think, in the New York Times. Frame nothing as a conflict between national interests. Have a clear... Listen, and this is how he concludes. Shut it all down. We are not ready. We are not on track to be significantly readier in the foreseeable future. If we go ahead on this, everyone will die, including children who did not choose this and did not do anything wrong. Now, Sam Altman came out and said, well, I disagree with Eliezer. But this is serious stuff. You understand this is the Tower of Babel. And I'm really serious when I say, like, what we know as what could be the beast system, I forget who it was, one of my friends said something like, the technology required for the beast, we've gone way beyond it. How long is God going to let this go? This is religious warfare, spiritual warfare that we're engaged in. This is very serious stuff. Time is short. I hope I've made that point today. This came up at the White House press briefing, what Eliezer had said in his article in Time magazine. Here's Peter Doocy questioning Karine Jean-Pierre about this. Now, watch the response of the lemmings in the room when Peter asked the question the second time. Here we go.
Thank you. On artificial intelligence, 1,000 of the world's smartest people are saying that AI can pose profound risks to society and humanity. They want you guys to regulate it. Will you?
You're talking about the letter that was released yesterday. So, look, it highlights a number of challenges addressed directly in the administration's blueprint for an AI Bill of Rights, which was released last October, as I'm sure you've been following, Peter. It includes principles and practices AI creators can use to ensure protections related to safety, civil rights, civil liberties, are integrated into AI systems from start to finish. Right now, there's a comprehensive process that is underway to ensure a cohesive federal government approach to AI-related risk and opportunities, including how to ensure that AI innovation and deployment proceeds with appropriate prudence and safety foremost in mind. And so we're going to, I don't have anything to announce at this point, at this time, but there is a comprehensive process in place.
So announcements aside, there is now there's an expert from the Machine Intelligence Research Institute who says that if there is not an indefinite pause on AI development, this is a quote, literally everyone on Earth will die. Would you agree that does not sound good?
Your delivery, Peter, is quite something.
It sounds crazy, but is it?
All I can say is that there's a comprehensive process in place. We put out a blueprint back in October, as you know. I don't have anything to share. We have seen the letter. We understand what their concerns are. Again, a comprehensive process. We'll let that flow.
So is President Biden worried that artificial intelligence could become self-aware?
Look, there's a comprehensive process. We are taking this very seriously. We put our blueprint out back in October. I just don't want to get ahead of our findings and what that's going to look like. But it is a cohesive federal government approach to AI-related risks, as you just laid out in a very dramatic way. But clearly,
is there anything more dramatic?
I mean, you just read it.
Literally everyone on Earth will die.
Pretty dramatic. Pretty dramatic. We're going to move on. But thank you, Peter. Thank you for the drama. Go ahead.
You think? So listen, the question is, Is AI self-aware? So let me just think, this is just off the top of my head. So Obama was the most self-aware human being ever to be in the office of presidency. Would you agree? He was self-aware like nobody ever. Now we come into the third Obama term, the Biden administration, and the question is the president self-aware? But listen, when Peter asked the legitimate question, Eliezer Lewandowski's not some thing. So there's going to be different responses to this. There's going to be people, you're a nut. There's going to be people that say, we need to proceed carefully. And then there's going to be people that are like, we're going for everything. And so in that environment, do you think China's going to stop? You think North Korea, Russia, they're going to stop? And the question then becomes, where does it all go? And you got to go do it like they do just to keep up, to protect yourself. And I keep thinking of that array of, that cloud of drones that they had in the United Arab Emirates to celebrate the New Year in Abu Dhabi, making art pictures in the sky with drones. But a human being couldn't do that. It had to be machine and artificial intelligence and that sort of thing. But if you think that's just, look at the pretty lights in the sky, that has a military application. And we're, you start to get a better idea of phrases that you see in prophetic texts in the New Testament about if, those days were not cut short, no flesh would be saved. Do you have a little bit of a better grasp of why you should look forward to the return of the Lord? Seriously. This is a religious thing that's going on. It's a prophetic thing that's going on. And so what Jonathan Medved said, we live in the story. Yeah, we're living in the story right now. Right now, right here, right now. And they laugh at him like, Peter, you think the world's coming to an end? Come on. A week and a half before, the New York Times and all the big mainstream media, all those guys in the rooms, climate change is going to kill us all in 50 years. But don't look at the shiny object right in front of your eyes, trying to read your eye. There's a rapidly closing window for opportunity to secure a livable and sustainable future for all. There's a very high confidence. This is the most striking sentence in a 37-page summary issued today of the latest report by the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. It tells us what's possible. It tells us the stakes. But don't let Eliezer Lewandowski talk about it, because that's funny. You think this could kill us? Come on. It's cow farts that's going to kill us. Gas stoves, heat, fire, refrigeration. This is insane. So I need to stop. This is the front page of the Financial Times Friday or yesterday. And a couple prepare for a multipolar currency world. I'll do something on midweek about that. China warning Europe. But look at this little headline up there above Bolsonaro, who's returning to Brazil. By the way, do you think that Brazil joining the BRICS this week had anything to do with the election result involving Mr. Bolsonaro? They put Luna in place, and now Brazil's joining in with Russia and China to get rid of the US dollar. And that's happening at we've been talking about it's going to happen eventually, but then it's like, how did you go bankrupt? Well, two ways. It gradually, then suddenly. How did the US dollar lose its thing? And so look at this, AI's existential threat to humanity. editorial. Multiple red flags are not yet slowing the generative AI train. This is the staid, stiff Financial Times of London saying, whoa, hey, wait a minute. Nobody in the Financial Times room is laughing like those idiots in the White House press room, because this is serious stuff. And yeah, humanity is at stake. Look at what they're doing with this. This is the Atlantic article. The real Taylor Swift. They're doing TikTok videos and stuff using artificial generative intelligence to make it look like Taylor Swift is telling you to have a good day and you're a good person. And they're all over the internet. So it says this real Taylor Swift would never do all this, but she's also a fan creation. Another Atlantic article, welcome to the big blur. So I'll do midweek, I'll talk about central bank digital currencies because there's a lot happening in this space, and it's all connected to this too. And it's concerning, but look, I know the Lord's coming back. There was an article here, I'll just show you one, because it kind of has a local aspect to it. Here you go. JP Morgan joins the biometric palm and face ID race. Oh. You can pay with your hand and pay with your face. And you see them all over the place. Credit cards only, no cash. Panera, you can wave your palm now and pay at Panera. You can do that at Amazon. I think I don't know if you can do it at Whole Foods. But it's an interesting time to be alive. And you need to be ready for what happens if you're not. And that's to accept the gospel of Jesus Christ. Believe that he came to earth, born of a virgin, lived a perfect life, died in our place for our sins so we could have a relationship with God, rose from the dead, ascended to heaven, and he's coming back to set up a kingdom. That's what we should look forward to. But we need to be ready for the stuff that happens in between. And we've been told about the parameters of that, and I think we're living in it. We're living in that story right now. So let's pray. Lord, thank you so much for the opportunity that we have to still talk about these things. We pray that you'll protect us, give us wisdom, give us courage, help us to take advantage of opportunities to share the gospel with those around us, and to be led by your Spirit in everything so that we will act wisely in everything that we do and act in such a way that will glorify you. Bless us this week in Jesus' name, amen.